I have to pause here because, first of all, I do find it very funny that there are a lot of people today referring to rhinos, and they mean it those who refused to oust Kevin McCarthy. Yesterday, 8 Republicans sided with all of the 200-plus Democrats to oust Kevin McCarthy. They appear to have earned the label rhino, to have sided with all the Democrats, but for some reason, some McCarthy haters, and by the way, if you're a longtime listener to this program, you know I don't like the guy, did not want him to be Speaker. But I don't think the rhino label applies to the Republicans who voted with the Republicans. But nonetheless, there are also those who, in fact, even in the comments of my Substack, for example, are talking about the conservatives, and the conservatives wanted McCarthy gone. When I was a lawyer, this is just going to be the tale of stories. When I was a lawyer, I had to do mandatory criminal indigent defense. Mandatory criminal indigent defense. I was required to represent poor criminals. Thankfully, one of the people I did not have to represent, but a friend of mine had to represent, was a homeless man who sat out on the street, literally across the street from the office I'm in now. And he would drop his pants and do things to himself, pleasure himself in public, secreting bodily fluids in the process. Particularly when he saw a woman, he would do it. He was nuts. He was a crazy homeless man who would, at the slightest provocation, drop his pants and go to town. He wound up going to prison and getting mental help. It probably is dead by now. He had no impulse control. He had no thought of the future. It was all about what gave him pleasure in the here and now, and no impulse control. And that is essentially those who are insisting that Kevin McCarthy needed to go then and there, and it felt good to do it, to scratch the itch, tickle the ear, and toss Kevin McCarthy. As I mentioned, Kevin McCarthy made a deal with the devil. He was always going to be ousted by a motion to vacate. He was always going to be ousted by a motion to vacate. He never should have been Speaker to begin with. And in fact, what I find very funny is many of the people who are blasting me for saying he shouldn't have gone at this moment were the very same people who were blasting me back in January for saying the man shouldn't be Speaker. Donald Trump in January said he should be Speaker, so by God, he should be Speaker. Donald Trump said nothing yesterday, so people were fine to turn on him. It is amazing to me the number of people who let one person's opinion guide them. I try to do nothing more here than to give you the information to think for yourself, but I do want you to think about this, those of you who were fine with Kevin McCarthy being ousted yesterday by Matt Gaetz. It was a lack of impulse control. It was not thinking. It was like the homeless dude outside my office building who'd drop his pants whenever he wanted and finally got carted off to prison. Why? Because the big continuing resolution comes up in 42 days. You've just squandered all of your leverage. Had you waited 30 more days and let the continuing resolution take shape, you could have extracted more concessions from Kevin McCarthy that benefited conservatives. And if you didn't, you would have had a larger number of people instead of 8 rallying to oust Kevin McCarthy. You gave up all your leverage on the big continuing resolution. In the process now, the House isn't even going to consider a new Speaker until at least next Wednesday. They've gone home. Patrick McHenry from North Carolina is now the Speaker pro tem. He sent them all home till next Wednesday. So now the Senate's in the driver's seat for the continuing resolution. You get a new Speaker next week. You're going to be 35, 36 days left to try to come up with a negotiating position with the Senate. Meanwhile, the Senate will work with House Republican moderates and the Democrats to give Ukraine everything it wants. I suspect Republicans will be able to get good border security out of this. I think what you're going to see is Republicans will tie border security and Ukraine together. If you want to fund Ukraine, Democrats, you got to fund the border for us. That's a fair bargain. Ukraine's probably going to get funded out of this because by Matt Gaetz doing what he did yesterday instead of 30 days from now, he squandered all the leverage. See, no one's going to become Speaker of the House without a commitment one way or the other in writing or a real agreement that is somehow binding to the parties that you're not going to immediately be able to oust that person in the next continuing resolution. Matt Gaetz forced conservatives to give up all their leverage. It's why people like Scott Perry and Chip Roy and Dan Bishop and others didn't go along with this. It's not that they never would. They probably would have 30 days from now if McCarthy wasn't structuring a good conservative deal for the ultimate continuing resolution. It was about the timing. It wasn't about it happening. McCarthy was always going to get ousted. It was about the timing. But Gaetz has no impulse control. He's a very smart guy. He is a very smart guy, but he has no impulse control, much like Donald Trump. He got the feeling that now was the time to do it, and so now was the time to do it, with no thought of the strategy, no thought of the plan, and no thought of who to replace McCarthy. Jim Jordan spoke in defense of McCarthy and was blasted, by the way, by Gaetz for a failure theater of an impeachment hearing. And now, ironically, if you want to see how transactional this is, Jordan defended McCarthy and attacked the process by which he was ousted. Gaetz then attacked Jordan and the impeachment hearing. And now Jordan says he's going to run for speaker, and Matt Gaetz is backing him. That's how transactional all of this is in Congress. Kevin McCarthy was always going to be ousted by a motion to vacate. It was always going to happen. He sold his soul for power, and the devil's bill came due. But had Matt Gaetz just waited 30 to 35 more days, he would have strengthened the conservative negotiating position for the continuing resolution that will ultimately lock in government spending for the next year. Instead, he did it yesterday and shot the whole conservative wad on having the power to oust the speaker, because anyone who takes the speakership now is going to want to guarantee that they're not going to even have a threat of being ousted until after this new continuing resolution. So now the Senate is in the driver's seat. The Senate is going to structure a Ukraine deal. The House may be able to structure border security in the process, and House moderate Republicans who did in fact hold the line with House conservatives, who did in fact suck it up and agree to terms from House conservatives on spending cuts, now have no reason to do so. If you get 218 members of the House of Representatives together, they can structure legislation and call it sign something called a discharge position, and they can force a vote on the floor of the House. What now is stopping House moderates from working with the Democrats to structure a deal to fund Ukraine? Nothing. All of the leverage conservatives had went out the window the moment Matt Gaetz decided to now, instead of 35 days from now, do this. Kevin McCarthy was always going to be ousted, but timing mattered greatly. Why do you oust him after a 45-day spending package when you have a 1-year spending package coming up still to be negotiated? Now you've ousted him. You have no one to replace him. The replacement's not going to come until at least a week from today. That puts the Senate in the driver's seat to structure a package with House Republican moderates and House Democrats that leaves conservatives on the sidelines. It was not smart to do it from a conservative standpoint. The people who did this, the 8 Republicans who did this, a couple of whom are actually friends of mine, I think the world of Ken Buck. But they should have waited. They should not have done it at the moment. It was another example of Republicans firing before aiming and thinking, what's on the horizon? How about a massive government spending package that we could hold our fire and use our leverage to structure? Nope, can't do that. Feels good. We got to do it now. Just like the homeless man dropping his pants. Dr. Faust, have no sympathy for him. He made his deal with the devil, and the devil called the bill. But for conservatives and for the country and for the spending and for the future, you should be a little concerned what Matt Gaetz just did undermines conservative leverage to restructure the future and save the country.